We've all heard of Skyrim. There's people today that still play it 100 years after its release. There's been plenty of games that have tried to further that ancient medieval experience, but not very many have captured it well. So when a good one finally comes along, it tends to stand out. I'm Sam the Ashen, and this is Tainted Grail: Fall of Avalon. Tainted Grail fully released on May 23rd, 2025 and was developed by a team of around 50 people called Questline. The game is $45, but there's also a free demo for all platforms. Tainted Grail spent some time in early access and received some pretty mixed reviews, but overall it was pretty positive. I played it way back in early access, and it was good. It was pretty rough around the edges, it was a bit janky, but that is a bit different now that the game is fully released. And I assume people tend to agree because the reviews have been very positive overall. Tainted Grail is an open-world action-adventure RPG, and the best comparison I can give is Skyrim, or better yet, the fan-made spin-off game Enderal. Right off the bat, I'll say that Tainted Grail does lack the AAA polish and scope that a game like Skyrim had, but it has ways that makes up for that. I personally love the darker twist for the world setting, the narrative, the enemies, and the overall atmosphere. Combat is pretty good, especially in comparison to other open world RPGs. There is a parry mechanic that is challenging enough to pull off, and feels really satisfying when you do. There's also a dodge that has iframes, which I really enjoy having in most games. The gear system is pretty standard for these types of games. There's a bunch of different weapons and weapon types, all with their own movesets. There are bows and throwing weapons, and there's also a big emphasis on magic. The magic in this game feels great, the animations look really good, and the sound design for the weapons and magic is also really good. There are regular and charge versions of most spells. Sometimes charging the spell changes it altogether, like the blood spell that applies bleeding with a regular attack, and siphoning enemies' health with the heavy attack. Magic overall is done really solid, but it is still a bit janky with hitboxes and animations, but it's not so bad that it ruins anything. The gear system seems to be fairly balanced with stat requirements for the better gear, and pretty hefty weight penalties for bulking up on armor. I particularly like how they handled armor that is too high a level for the player. Instead of just being locked out of it, you only get a certain percentage of the armor and you can't use any of the special effects from the armor until you meet the relevant stat requirements. I think this is a good balance of not letting the player get really overpowered too easy or early, but still letting you take advantage of doing high-level quests and fights early. One of the core aspects of any game in this genre is exploration. The game is open world, and when you complete the tutorial, you're free to explore. But come nighttime, a core story and gameplay element comes into play: the weirdness, with a Y. I know it's kind of a goofy name when it's pronounced like weird, like odd, but the concept is fine enough. It's like a plague that hurts the entire land, and eerie monsters are creeping around in the night that you either have to avoid by building a fire and resting, or you can just fight whatever is out there. There's a lot more nuanced lore behind it, but that's the basics, I think. Exploration is pretty great all around, and one of the things that I really appreciate in any game is rewarding players for exploring off the beaten path. And Tainted Grail does a great job of this. Although it's open world, it's not procedurally generated. They opted for a smaller size that they actually handcrafted. I am absolutely in favor of this. I pretty much will always take quality over quantity, and this is a great example. This isn't to say that the world is perfect, but it does feel like each area has a purpose and has its own identity. If there's a collapsed tower near a fortress, you might climb up and find a forgotten knight's armor in a chest or something. Down by the ocean, there are villages that have been overcome by drowners. An interesting note, the developers are Polish, and as was the creator of The Witcher, and both of these worlds have drowners as a creature. This could be a common thing around the world, but it seemed like it might be a legend specific to Poland or something. I thought that was a cool little coincidence. The environments overall are beautiful, and the design and dark fantasy elements are on full display, and I love every bit of it. Something important to note, the performance seems to be somewhat of an issue for some people. I personally had some issues with frame rate, screen tearing, and just general bad performance until I tweaked the settings and found a good mix. This solved the problem for me while still making the game look decent, but it's still something to consider. The story. The story is possibly the weakest part of the game, but as with most things, it's subjective. I personally enjoy the story a lot. I know the King Arthur legend has been way overdone in media in general, but I personally haven't consumed a lot of that media, so it didn't feel overdone to me. The characters are decent overall. The voice acting is kinda hit or miss. Some of the voice actors are really good and fit the character perfectly, but then some other ones are really generic and mediocre at best. I have a pretty low bar for voice acting, so it might vary for some people. I guess this could be a light spoiler, but this is something that you find out in the tutorial, so I'm gonna go ahead and tell you. King Arthur ties into this game because he becomes part of you. He lost his memory, so in exchange for him giving you some of his power, you travel the land trying to find his missing memory. They aren't just laying around, they're all tied up in quests. I think this is a pretty cool setup. I had a good time uncovering the mysteries and the betrayals and the secrets. So overall, I think the game is great. By far, my favorite part of the game is the design and the environment and the atmosphere. It has some of the coolest dark fantasy elements that I've seen in a game in a while. Just to touch on progression, it's a pretty classic RPG system. You have different stats that you level up from getting experience. You level up your main stats, and then there's also a big perk tree. There's things like strength, perception, dexterity, and within these there's a bunch of trees to choose from where you can spend all your perk points. Some of the things are actually meaningful, like adding new passives and stuff, but some of them are also just generic stat increases like +1 strength or +5% melee damage. I'm not a huge fan of this in games. It doesn't make the progression feel very meaningful, but it serves its purpose well enough. Combat is a bit janky, but it's still a lot of fun. I enjoy this combat a lot more than I did Skyrim's combat. I think the bottom line is if you like Skyrim, this is a great game to play. You're bound to have fun with it. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, leaving a like helps me out a lot. If you have any thoughts, I would love to hear from you in the comments. If you want to see more from me, subscribe. I post once every other Sunday, so I'll never clog up your feed. I hope you have a good one. Peace out.